Welcome to Citizens Forum. I'm the host. My name is Walter McGinnis. In the first segment today, we have Alan Castles, who's a drug researcher here from the University of Victoria. And Alan's going to be talking about diabetes today and the issues around diagnosis of diabetes. Now, I have here, reading here today is an article Alan wrote for Focus magazine for September 2016. And the title of the article is "The Diabetes Diagnosis," and the byline is "The War on Blood Glucose is Stupid, Costly, and Bloody." So Alan, that's the first question. Why would you say that that the war on keeping blood sugar levels down is stupid, costly, and bloody?
Well, yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. I mean, the main issue that I'm talking about around diabetes is just the massive amounts of deception that is involved in both the diagnosis and the treatment. So, I mean, this article was motivated by a couple of things. My research around how diabetes is really one of those conditions that is very ripe for pharmaceutical treatment. So you've got the drug companies focused heavily on diabetes. Why? Because everyone, if they reach a certain age and are relatively sedentary, i.e. they don't move too much and maybe they eat a lot of high glucose food, a high carbohydrate food, will have high blood sugars. So it's a great patient population, and it's big and it's growing. And as you get older, naturally your blood sugars will rise somewhat. Yeah. And so you've got a growing and expanding population that you can treat with drugs. And so the question, of course, is great. You've got people with diabetes, or the precursor to it, pre-diabetes, where your blood sugars aren't quite high, but they're maybe a little high. Wouldn't it be great if we were to give people drugs at a timely fashion where they take them, and it will reduce their risk of having complications or even dying because of diabetes?
Now the thing is, if someone was diagnosed as being pre-diabetic,
right,
it doesn't make sense just to take the drugs then. It's sort of to protect you from worse sort of outcomes later on.
I think pre-diabetes is probably one of the biggest farces in the whole diabetes deception. That is, we're all pre-diabetic, right? We're all at a point where we may have slightly elevated blood sugars, and therefore we become categorized as patients. Yeah. So the problem with the pre-labels is that you're taking healthy people, otherwise healthy people, and saying you could be at risk of having a condition, therefore you should do something. And the something typically is, well, you should watch your diet, maybe eat more vegetables, you should exercise more. Good advice. Or you should start taking drugs such as metformin or other diabetes treatments. So this idea that you would take relatively healthy people, want to protect them, so we're giving them advice, we're labeling them as being pre-sick, and we're starting to recommend drug treatment for them.
Now, if you have diabetes, you're a threat of having diabetes, what are the things that what are the health symptoms, and what are the other risks other than diabetes?
So let's be clear. I'm talking about type 2 diabetes versus type 1. So type 1 diabetes is the type that it's also known as juvenile onset diabetes. You typically develop when you're a child. It's when your pancreas is not working properly, not producing insulin. Yeah. And people with type 1 diabetes have to do daily insulin injections, keep them alive. It's quite a medical miracle that we can keep people alive with insulin. But what I'm talking about is type 2 diabetes that you develop. It's also known as adult onset diabetes. You develop as a result of poor insulin production, and typically associated with people who have poor diets and insufficient exercise. Yeah, you're overloading the system. Your system produces too much sugar, and that sugar is reflected in your blood. And so the question is, what's the definition of a type 2 diabetic? Well, when you look at the information produced by, say, the Canadian Diabetes Association, you would see that if your hemoglobin A1C, which is a measurement of blood sugar, is 7 or above, that is sort of the danger category. And so the recommendations for in a lot of the stuff that's guided towards physicians is to get patients' blood glucose down below 7. And you know, it might make sense to do that
Yeah.
if doing so increased the length of your life, made your life longer and healthier.
Yeah.
Because the kinds of complications, as you asked, things like you can get problems with your feet, you can develop gangrene, you can have retinal eye problems, and you know, having very extreme blood sugars can increase your risk of heart attacks or strokes.
Right. So, I mean, okay, for the most part, we're finding doctors are prescribing some drugs to bring down the blood sugar levels.
Yeah.
Now, are they saying, okay, now you're safer, you're not as likely to have a stroke or a heart attack? Or
Yeah. And here's another part of the diabetes deception,
Yeah.
is that doctors often will follow guidelines produced by expert groups. So the expert group in Canada is the Canadian Diabetes Association. They have an expert panel, and they create guidelines that suggest when doctors should be
Yeah.
recommending drug therapy and so on. And you know, the guidelines aren't bad in terms of, you know, saying that patients should be exercising, they should be eating properly. But when they start talking about the drugs, this is where it gets me kind of worked up, and my blood pressure goes up, because they start recommending drugs, sometimes 1 or 2 or even 3 drugs to bring your blood sugars down, without any evidence that those drugs are actually going to increase the length or the quality of your life.
Yeah.
So the drugs are very good at altering your numbers, but who cares? What really matters is whether it's actually going to make you healthier or live longer.
And also, what are the side effects of those drugs?
Yeah, precisely. You know, there have been, quite frankly, quite a bit of bad news coming in about some of the newer drugs. You've got drugs like the gliptins or the tides. These are
Yeah.
drugs that are newer, they're on patent, they're prescribed quite widely, and there's no evidence that these drugs would actually prevent the kinds of serious adverse effects like heart attacks and strokes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, are there studies perhaps that show what happens to a person that takes these drugs for 20 or 30 years?
Well, sure. There aren't. I mean, because these
Yeah.
drugs are approved on the basis of maybe 1 or 2 year trials. So we don't know what happens to someone when you're altering their blood glucose for
Yeah.
15 or 20 years. What we do know is that a lot of people are not going to tolerate these drugs very well.
Yeah.
So you've got patients who are concerned about their blood sugars. They're told, okay, you're diabetic because your hemoglobin A1C is 8,
Yeah.
where it should be 7, and therefore this person will perhaps be sent to a diabetes educator who will say, you need to do what you can to bring those levels down, including taking drugs, testing your blood frequently with
Right.
blood glucose test strips and so
Yeah.
on. It's a massive pharmaceutical market. It's extremely lucrative for the
Okay.
companies, and we're spending an awful lot of money on diabetes, and we're probably not getting much in return.
So how much are Canadians spending a year? Do you remember?
It would be in the hundreds of millions of dollars
Yeah.
on these drugs.
Yeah.
So in British Columbia, for example, the Therapeutics Initiative did an analysis and said that about 100,000 British Columbians are taking metformin, which is the
Yeah.
cheapest, one of the oldest diabetes drugs. About 50 or 60,000 are taking 2 or more, 2 drugs, and about 30,000 are taking 3 drugs.
Yeah.
So we're actually medicating a huge number of people with multiple drugs, probably to no effect.
And there are these potential side effects that we might be seeing in the future.
Yeah, I mean, if you're
No.
taking healthy people already and you're giving them a preventive treatment, you have to make sure that the bar is very high,
Yeah.
because you can maybe improve the length and quality of their life, but you might actually reduce it as well.
Yeah.
People can suffer the adverse effects of the diabetes drugs.
Yeah. Now, you also mentioned the Cochrane Commission. Is it a Cochrane?
It's the Cochrane Collaboration. Here's
Yeah.
a plug for my last book. I
Yeah.
wrote a book called The Cochrane Collaboration, Medicine's Best Kept Secret. And one of the things, they did an analysis on what they called tight glucose control. So they compared groups of patients who had high blood sugars but were allowed to not take as many drugs to keep them down.
Yeah.
So they might be taking 1 or 2 drugs to
Yeah.
and then they had the group that was the tight group where they were taking 3 or 4 drugs to try to reduce their blood sugar. So their blood sugars were lower in the tight group
Yeah.
versus the more loose group. And this was in multiple studies, and they found that those with the tight glycemic control actually had worse outcomes, more adverse effects, more health problems. Essentially, they were harmed by this aggressive driving of lower blood glucose.
Yeah, and that makes sense that that the body has to deal with all these new things.
No, I should be clear that if your blood glucose is off the charts high, there's definitely a case to be made for drugs and treatment.
Yeah.
I'm talking not about people whose blood glucose are 12 or 14. I'm talking about people who might be riding around 8 or 8.5.
Yeah.
To have those people obsess about their blood glucose and to continue to see the doctor to take more and more drugs to lower it is just really, frankly, we're terrorizing people with the label, and we're causing them to spend way too much money on drugs, and we're not buying any health outcomes with it.
That's the thing too, is that I find is that it seems that once you have a label on a disease, then it seems to be that you automatically have a drug.
Well,
that
it becomes an obsession too. It's like if I told you you've got high cholesterol, but then there's a drug you can take to lower, you're going to be, well, yeah, maybe I should be taking this drug. And then your life becomes going back to the doctor to check your cholesterol. Oh, it's now a little high. Oh, it's now a little low. You're tweaking it with drugs. Are you actually making yourself healthier? No, certainly with the statins, the cholesterol lowering drugs, tweaking your cholesterol is an utter waste of time.
Really?
Yes. With glucose lowering, as I said, if it's extremely high, definitely to do something to bring it down. But if it's around normal or pre-normal, to label people with the disease, you're a type 2 diabetic, and then to tell them that you have to do something or you're going to die, is really, it's a kind of terrorism.
Well, yeah, it's you could be spending the rest of your life worrying about something that you shouldn't have been as concerned about, and I can see where.
And what drives me nuts is a lot of elderly people who will be told they've got high blood glucose. The obsession with checking, monitoring, taking drugs. I've seen this over and over again. I saw it in my own family where that kind of becomes their hobby. That becomes their life. And so they're degrading a whole aspect of an elderly person's life by getting them to obsess about something that probably is not going to go on to hurt them.
Well, thank you very much, Alan, for coming in. I recommend that everybody read the article. It's in the September edition of Focus magazine. And if you think you have diabetes or if you're diagnosed as having diabetes, it's really good information to have to really look at whether or not you're doing the right thing to protect your health. So that concludes this segment of Citizens Forum. Welcome to the second segment of Citizens Forum. And today we have with us Warner Simbeck. Warner is an informed citizen, something we need much more of these days. And we're going to talk about a few things around the issues of climate change and what our federal and provincial governments are doing to either help us or help the oil and gas industry. It's hard to tell. But firstly, let's talk about, we have these two governments, these two Liberal governments now in Canada. We have the Liberal government of Christy Clark in British Columbia, and we also have a Liberal government in the federal government in Canada. And recently, the federal government approved the Site C dam. Did that process, was that an environmental approval, or what sort of approval was that?
Well, I think they just pushed it through.
Yeah.
I think the federal Liberals promised to negotiate openly and honestly with the First Nations.
Yeah.
And with the Site C, they just pushed it through.
Okay.
There are court challenges on the environmental groups as well as the Native groups who are not happy with this decision at all. They were not asked. But in the meantime, construction has already started. There have been already clear cutting large areas to get ready to build this dam.
Yeah.
Of course, it's out of sight, out of mind. It's pretty far north from here. Very few people ever go up there. And the farmers that are affected, they're also very small in numbers, and their voices are just not being heard, including the natives.
It is also, I think, when you think of a project, say like the Site C Dam, that has impact globally on the environment, as well as particularly in British Columbia, but it seems that they just want to talk about a few Indian bands in the Peace River Valley that don't want to have this built, as if that we could just sort of brush them aside because it's just a few of them. Everybody else seems to want to have this dam.
Yeah, well, I feel sorry for the people that are affected directly, but we are being cheated. The Canadian citizen is being cheated because we have a federal government who promised a different approach, and we have not seen it yet. The same thing goes with the pipeline negotiations. It's not happening. People are not being heard, and now we just got approval of the liquefied natural gas plant up on the coast in Prince Rupert, I think it is, where they want to do this. Again, the natives weren't asked. They want to build this on an island there, which is sacred to the natives from that area. Again, they weren't asked. They didn't give their blessing. They're going to challenge this project as well. So we're talking, millions and millions of dollars in court battles, lawyer fees. Are they going to get it in the end of the day? I'm not sure. It probably goes all the way to the Supreme Court. Is it going to be built by then? And then they're going to say, sorry, you can't do this? Or, well, sorry, it's already built. Tough luck. So, I mean, it's challenging, right? I think why is it that the Liberal government is basically approving these things so quickly? You got to ask yourself, what are they doing here? Why are we not seeing a change? Because it would have been no different with the Conservative government.
Yeah. So this is going to increase Canada's CO2 emissions.
Absolutely. The natural gas one for sure. And the dam, the Site C Dam, on paper you might be able to demonstrate, it's beneficial for the environment. Yeah. But if you look at the entire calculation, because you have to deforest the land, a lot of CO2 emissions right there. You're going to submerge a huge area. Yeah. It's going to release methane, huge greenhouse gas driver. Then you need millions of tons of concrete, unbelievably high in CO2 emissions. And then it's going to be lasting maybe 400 years, and then we have to take it all apart again. Right. So sure, we're going to have a benefit when it's operating. It's clean, unquote clean, sort of. Yeah. But it's $9 billion, I think, is what they're hoping for. It's going to cost. We all know it's going to cost more. It always does.
Now, the Liberals said that they wanted to have better goals to achieve for CO2 emissions at the Paris climate talks last year.
Christie was there,
Yeah,
sure.
and I was just wondering, has the Liberal government of Canada set better guidelines or goals than what the Conservatives were?
No, they're going to use the Conservative government, the Conservative Party's targets that they had in place when they were in power just a few months ago. Right. The Liberals basically took them over and went with those to Paris, to the negotiations, and promised to do more. But they didn't put anything more on the table. They just promised more.
Now, here's another issue, too, is like for the LNG proposals, and you have Petronas is a major proponent.
From Malaysia,
From Malaysia. Yeah. That's a state-run energy company. Yeah. So you have a government now that has an energy company, and you have governments in Canada making deals with this other government, and one has to wonder, what if we had by chance we had elected government here that says no, we don't want to go in that direction. What do you think would happen with the proposal?
They probably get sued, right? But I think what's going to happen is Petronas is going to sell their majority stake, as what you've been hearing on the news if you've been listening. I bet you China is going to buy them. And China already has a trade agreement with us. Yeah. And they can sue us.
So what that means through NAFTA or whatever?
Well, that special trade agreement that was quietly signed by the Harper government. Harper basically pushed it through. Elizabeth May was the only voice of opposition. I don't know if you remember this. Yeah. She even stood up in the House of Commons, talked about it. Yeah. pointed out that there are some key problems with this agreement.
Yeah.
Basically, that the Chinese we're selling our laws, or our ability to make laws. We're going to give those up basically when we sign this agreement with China. China basically has the overriding power.
Yeah.
If we pass a law that they don't like, they can sue us.
Okay.
Great. So if we want to do something for the environment, they'll sue us. So we can't do it. So our hands are tied, and I think it's for 45 years or something crazy like that before we can get out of this.
Right.
So, blame the previous government for it.
Yeah.
Now the Liberals' hands are tied with respect to this, but what's missing in this entire discussion, in my opinion, just my opinion, what's at stake? What's really at stake?
Yeah.
If we as a world community do not get our act together regarding climate change, seriously reduce our emissions, really trying hard, like it's going to be like a Second World War effort, everybody has to pull on the same string or the rope.
So how about this though?
If we don't,
what would happen?
What would happen if we don't do it? Well,
what if they sued us?
Oh,
I
that.
mean, at a certain
it's
point.
just money.
It's just money. The thing is that, okay, some foreign government or some corporation is going to sue us. So sue the Canadian government. What if the government just said, no, we're not going to pay you. We don't agree with that.
Well, there'll be probably some sanctions, right? That's what I'm saying. If Malaysia sells its majority stake to China, China has a legal agreement with us.
Yeah.
They can really hurt us.
They are known to play hardball and other
Absolutely.
issues for sure.
Yeah.
And they need the energy, and they're professing that they really want to.
They want the oil, they want the gas.
That's right. They may not want to pay very much for it.
That's right.
Okay, just touching on a couple other topics because there's so many things involved here.
Right.
But set the money aside,
right,
and all those other things. Say, for instance, recently the CRD, the local Capital Regional District, has approved building a sewage treatment facility right down beside the ocean. And the first thing that I thought about was, well, how close to the ocean, and did they read any information on sea level rise?
Right.
Do you think they've taken that into account?
Probably not. I think sea level rise is going to be like this dragon that we never thought of.
Yeah.
It's going to really come out of nowhere and really going to frighten us and really going to cost our shirts, because the world economy is really driven by a lot of shipping, a lot of trade, and it's happening at big metropolitan areas that are by the ocean.
Yeah.
If the ocean level rises a meter in 40 years, say, from now, which is what James Hansen, the famous climate scientist, has been predicting, estimating, because what we're doing is unprecedented.
Yeah.
The doubling rate of ice melt in the South Pole as well as at Greenland is doubling every 7 years or so now. Basically, what that means, we can easily have a meter in 40 years more. Right? But what you also have to realize is not just ocean level will rise because of melting, it will also rise because of temperature. If the ocean gets a little bit warmer, it expands. And that's how you get more ocean level rise, just from the expansion of the water. Right? But anyways, I mean, that's, if we only have a meter, that's great. But the CO2 that we have right now, the CO2 concentration that we have right now, is 400 parts per million. Doesn't sound like a lot, but it's an indicator. It's an indicator. The last time we had that much CO2 in the atmosphere, the oceans were 7 meters higher. Right?
So
7 meters
could be
higher.
headed for.
We're heading for 7 meters, and there's nothing we can do about that.
Yeah.
Those are the rules. The only way to get that reversed is by us reversing the CO2 trend. That means no more fossil fuel projects.
Yeah.
Basically, we have to go. We have to really pull all the stops out.
Yeah.
We cannot have economic growth the way we're used to, right? But that's what we're being sold at.
Yeah.
An increase in population, an increase in economic activity. Well, guess what that means? That means more CO2 emissions.
Now, do you know of any political party, say let's talk about the provincial scene here, because we're running into an election cycle now, and now the electorate gets a choice and they can make some decisions here and have some input. We know the Christy Clark Liberals are full on developing oil and gas, developing Site C and all that. But how about do you know if the Greens or the NDP are offering alternatives?
Well, the only party that I've heard that basically is speaking truth to power is the Green Party.
Right.
The NDP, oh, they're really wishy-washy on all these issues.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're not firm. They want their cake and eat it too, kind of thing.
So how, say on the Site C dam, how do you see how they're wishy-washy there?
Well, I'm not exactly sure on their position on that, but what I remember hearing is that they were generally in favor of it.
Yeah.
And really, unfortunately, all these big projects, they have big dollar signs associated with it, and it looks like it's going to be good for the economy, but in reality, it never is. It never is. It's like the Olympics. Oh, it's going to be all this economic activity. When you look at the various cities around the world that had the Olympics, well, they're still trying to pay it off.
So it's not really
it's like these mega projects, they're good for the big corporations who built them and who lend us the money, the banks.
Yeah.
But for us, no, absolutely not. What would be way better is for everybody to put solar panels on their roofs. Decentralize the power grid. Yeah. Be far more resilient. So if the power goes out because of an earthquake, well, guess what? Most people will still have power because they got solar panels on the roof. Yeah. Far more resilient, far cheaper.
That's right. How about for other energy consumption issues like, do you think perhaps the government should be taking more, taking more initiative for helping with, say, retrofitting buildings,
absolutely,
energy efficient buildings?
Yeah, they should. There's lots of opportunities, tons. Yeah. And there's lots of jobs to be created and economic activity. Yeah. That $9 billion for a dam, if you were to use that to, as I said, retrofit, as what you suggested, retrofit homes and put solar panels on roofs that make sense, you could generate so many jobs, so many skilled laborers that we need moving forward. It would be great. It would be a good initiative. Yeah. But what we're doing is, far up there, we're destroying our last bit of fertile land that we have available in this province. So I don't know why we're sacrificing this land up there for a big dam that we don't really need. That power will become handy for the oil sands. Yeah. Ooh, they're going to be able to reduce their emissions because of using green power. Great. Yeah. Or the fracking that we're going to do. All those fracking wells that have to be operated, by green electricity from our dam.
I mean, there's so many components to this, Warner. And we're always hoping. I'm always hoping that we could steer the ship away from the rocks, but it seems right now that the other interests have a hold of the helm. And
voters have to realize something, that if the scientists are right, our children's future is at stake. Yeah. Their survival is at stake. That's what's at stake here. Yeah. It's not that the whale's going to go extinct. We're probably going to go extinct because we're going to run out of fresh air and fresh water. Yeah. Because if we're so stupid, I'm sorry to say that.
Well, I don't differ in that opinion. So, Warner, thank you so much for coming in. We kind of went over a few of these issues. Again, it's always to keep these things top of mind, and particularly when we're looking at the political side of it. If there's ever a chance that we have for making a change in BC, we should be looking at how we can do it politically. So thank you very much for coming in today.
Thanks for having me.
So that completes this segment of Citizens Forum. Welcome to Citizens Forum. My name is Walt McGinnis. I'm your host today. And I'd like to thank Shaw and their staff and these great volunteers that make this show happen every week. It wouldn't happen at all without these great people working so hard to get a little bit of information out to the public. Now today we have with us Brian Burchell. Brian's with an organization called Arrest, and Brian's going to tell us what that stands for. And he has been engaged in the process of communicating with the federal government on their approval, more or less, of this of the new sewage treatment plan. And he's been asking questions as to what criteria they've been using. So welcome, Brian, to the show.
Thank you very much.
And firstly, let's just do a review. What does Arrest stand for?
It's the Association for Responsible and Environmentally Sustainable Sewage Treatment. And I emphasize we're for these.
You're for
so
treatment.
This moniker that we're anti-treatment is nonsense. We're all about good,
Yeah.
responsible, environmentally sustainable treatment.
Now, I know you wrote this open letter to Minister McKenna, and she has issued a reply to you, and you've asked these questions of what science they've been using and things like that. Yeah. And now, have you formulated a reply to her?
Yes, actually, the open letter was to the Prime Minister, and copied to a few other ministers, including Minister McKenna.
All right.
And what we got was a confirmation from the Prime Minister's office that they had read it and forwarded it to the Minister McKenna. And we did get a reply on May the 20th. I have it right here. And although it does have apparently Minister McKenna's signature, the phrasing in it is extremely similar to the way her Parliamentary Secretary, Mr. Jonathan Wilkinson, writes. So it appears that he wrote it, at least a substantial part of it. And before I get into our response, a couple of things that jumped out at us that we responded to was they start with very broad statements such as untreated wastewater is shown to cause a variety of harmful effects, and effluent is one of the largest sources of pollution in Canada, and so on. Probably true statements. Let's assume they are. The thing is, they don't apply to Victoria. Yeah. We don't have untreated wastewater. We've got extremely well-treated wastewater, almost essentially equivalent to secondary treatment. We treat differently than what they would like, but it has the same effect of a good treatment system. And also, they talk about impacts of things like fish kill, algal blooms, and destruction of habitat. Victoria is not causing those problems.
So there's never any evidence of those things happening in Victoria?
No, they don't apply to Victoria. So this comeback doesn't apply to Victoria. It's a silly comeback. We also, in our open letter, complained that the risk classification, high risk, was wrong, and therefore the deadline date of December 31st, 2020 to get a new system in place, that needs to be changed because we're under the wrong classification. And the response we got back on that was, there's no mechanism in the regulations to alter it. Sorry, you're stuck with it. No mechanism.
The train has left the station.
Yeah, that stuff too. But that is a nonsensical statement. That's actually insulting to say there's no mechanism. Every statute is amendable. As a matter of fact, there's a program, I've got the name here, it's called the Miscellaneous Statute Law Amendment Program. And its purpose is to be able to alter programs, to enable anomalies, inconsistencies, and errors in federal statutes to be amended. So it's entirely amendable. So this is an insulting comeback. Okay, our response was to deal with specifics. They came back with generalities, and they assumed, based on these generalities, they're assuming that what this plan that's been approved is going to be a benefit. Well, that, it turns out, is a violation of the regulations themselves, or the guidelines that accompany the regulations, the guidelines. Because the guidelines point out that we may not assume anymore. We have to prove things with cost-benefit analysis. Right. And that's right in the guidelines. And the assumption, it used to be okay to assume that, well, if we build a wastewater treatment plant, we're all going to be better off. That the cost of it, or let's say the environmental benefit, would outweigh the cost. Well, with resources now tighter money and so on, the government is saying that that's no longer acceptable. Yeah. That you have to do a cost-benefit analysis. The terminology is to ensure what they call economic efficiency. Yeah. So anyway, that's not being done. So the Ministry of the Environment that is responsible for overseeing the implementation of these regulations is starting to already violate their own guidelines of not assuming. Yeah. So that's important. And I address the date can be altered if they get the risk classification correct. Right. So I pointed out these kinds of things. What we have is a treatment system that is treating using CRD used to have it on their own website that we have preliminary treatment. But there's another thing we're doing, which is, and I can't recall, we may have discussed this already, but if we put pollutants into the wastewater, and then somewhere downstream we want to treat that and get those pollutants back out. Well, that's one way you can do it, which is very energy intensive and hurts the environment more to do those processes. What's smarter is to just not put them in the first place. It's called source control, and that's what Victoria is doing.
Yeah.
So we are treating by not putting them in the first place.
Now, how does source control really work, though? I mean, if I go to the local hardware store or something like that and go down the aisles, you can find solvents, you can find all sorts of nasty things on those shelves. How can those things, how can we keep that from ending up down the drain?
We're not supposed to, like we used to. People used to pour them down the drain or rinse those things
Yeah.
out. Right? We're not supposed to. Things like paint cans. You're supposed to just let the paint dry and you take the can back for recycling.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've been to Heartland. They have a separate area for that. They have a way to recycle and reclaim. An example that is definitely referred to frequently with our source control program is things like mercury from dental offices.
Yeah.
That used to go down the drain. Well, now that is kept in the dental offices and it's picked up. That's resource recovery.
Yeah.
That's another thing. They say, well, we don't have resource recovery in our system. We do.
Yeah.
The things we're not putting in are being held back and recovered by not putting them in the first place. So again, we have not only are we treating, but I think we're treating more intelligently than what the guidelines are.
So I'm just going to ask a couple of questions because I'm just seeing here, like, when you talk about cost-benefit analysis, I mean, if you set aside the financial aspects of it, and if you just said, okay, let's look at the environment. What are we giving up? What sort of threats are to our environment if we go with this type of technology? And what are we gaining? See, I think the argument always has been, say, we're going to propose as a land-based system where all these things are going to remain on land.
Yes.
As compared to having them being in the ocean. Now, is there been a study on that particularly?
We actually spoke to that. That's a good question. The question we put to the minister is that, or asking for, is to make sure the cost-benefit analysis is done. We need proof that the minimal benefit that the regulations will provide us, and that's what the marine scientists are telling us, is that the regulations will have a minimal change to the impact on the straits. So the question is, for all of the impact to our neighborhoods and all the greenhouse gases that this new project is going to cause, will those be worth, plus the financial cost, will that be worth the minor benefit that the marine scientists, and including the Department of Fisheries and Oceans' own scientists, their most recent study in 2014, is again saying that the benefit will be minor. As a matter of fact, their word was negligible. That's
almost nothing.
Yeah, right. So we're scientists and public health officers and engineers, the experts that are watching this, they're saying that the odds are extremely good that if we do the cost-benefit analysis, it's going to show that we'll not be better off. The money will be poorly spent. The hit to the environment with extra greenhouse gases. And let's be clear here. It's not just the greenhouse gases of the local trucks running around with supplies and the concrete that's going to be used to create the new treatment plant, but also all the greenhouse gases and energy spent to extract the resources, to process the resources, transport them for processing and so on, to create the resources, and then transport them to site. All that should be taken into account in a cost-benefit analysis. That's part of your question is, what are we doing to the environment in order to create this land-based sewage treatment plant? And what will we get for it? Well, that answer, most people can answer that because all you gotta do is go down to the waterfront where the outfalls are. What's the problem? People are windsurfing, and people are kayaking, and people are fishing, and people are walking along the waterfront. There is no problem there.
What about they do water testing and they look for fecal coliforms and all that? What level are they finding out near these areas where the outfalls are?
There was 3 years ago a press release, pardon me if we've covered this one as well, press release about fecal coliform contamination on the waterfront. And that turned out to be a hoax because the CRD has done its own study. It was a 13-year study of the impact of the coliforms coming out of the pipes, and it was found that in less than half a kilometer, it was about 400 meters, that the coliforms coming out of the pipes have died off down to natural levels. You don't kill them all off. There's a natural level of coliforms in the ocean, on the ocean floor, and it just dies off. The harsh environment of the ocean, especially the cold water, it just kills it off down to natural levels. So the thing is that we have a treatment system. The ocean itself is treating very effectively, so effectively that it's not coming back to shore, that it's treated within, as I say, about 400 meters. And the reason we have long outfall pipes is to reach out into the currents. They're headed to the Pacific. So it's being carried away from us as it's being treated, and within a very short distance, it's treated and off it goes. It's just natural.
How deep is that? Is it where
65, they're about 65 meters deep.
Okay.
The end of the pipes.
Okay. Now, another thing that I always thought about was, okay, we desperately need good, unbiased, scientific information about how the system that we have right now, how it's working, and to do this true comparison of a land-based system. Now, would it be possible to get an unbiased opinion on this project? Who could do that? Who could do that assessment?
Well, I would say the scientists. The scientists, their interest in this is, as they say, is we just want to protect the environment. We're not going to fudge the numbers. Here's the data, and they're telling us they've already done it essentially, and they're saying is there are problems, but they're not with the two outfalls.
How about the CRD though? The CRD must have scientific studies that they're relying on.
Okay, true. The CRD is monitoring our present system. They have all kinds of data, some of which I presume is studied by their own technicians, but also a lot of it is studied by scientists at the Institute of Ocean Sciences, UBC, UVic. They're taking the data and they study and they publish reports, and including the marine scientists in Washington State University. They also have reviewed the data, and they write studies. They do studies and they write conclusions and so on, and they consistently keep concluding that the impact of our present system on the Straits of Juan de Fuca is negligible. So the complaints out of Washington are political complaints. Whereas, and the politicians in Washington, what they are irked about is that their own marine scientists keep coming up with data that won't back their political statements that that Victoria's causing problems. Victoria's not causing a problem. We're not polluting Puget Sound, for example.
Well, we're going to have to leave that as it is right today. I've always promised to have you back again, and I think we just have to have you back because the story's just getting interesting. We're really getting down to the meat and potatoes of this issue. Where are they getting this information? How solid? How could they take statements like that and have the rationale to build this plan?
As one person just recently said to me, it's an abuse of office. It's irresponsible. It's an abuse of office. It's an abuse of power. The politicians that are local councillors, directors at CRD, they hold office, and they have the choice of whether or not to accept the facts and the evidence that the science has. It's there, and the politicians can say, well, thank you very much, but I'm not going to bother using that. They can do that. That's irresponsible, and the only thing we can do about that is at the ballot box.
Exactly.
They can carry on doing that, and unless they break the law, there's nothing we can do.
Well, let's see what happens. I mean, we can inform the public, and hopefully the public can get up to speed enough on this that they can start making demands, because I think the public is sort of asleep on this issue and they're not really getting
tired
engaged.
of it. The public
they've
gotten tired of it, but the facts are still the facts.
They're not making those demands on their local politicians.
No, I agree.
Okay, Brian, we're going to have you back again in a little while, and give us an update when you get more information back on your Freedom of Information
Hopefully
request.
we've got something there, yes.
And let's just see where we can go with that.
Okay.
So that concludes this segment of Citizens Forum. Welcome back to Citizens Forum, and today we've brought somebody out from behind the curtain, the fellow that usually is doing a lot of technical work for us, the editor and director of our show, Will Smith. And I got a question to ask you, Will. I'm just wondering, what did you do this weekend?
Well, Walt, I'm glad you asked that question. This weekend, my wife and I went to the first annual Cannabis Cup in Victoria, which is a craft cannabis fair. They're showing off, different dispensaries were showing off what they did, but there were also a lot of companies that had, seeds. There was a company that had an automated resin extraction system that continuously took the liquid phase product and turned it into a vapor phase and then condensed it, and so you have this continuous supply of
Now, where was this held
THC.
at?
This was at the main event was at the Da Vinci Center, which is over in
Right.
Vic West. I think it's technically
Right.
Vic West, right? So we were there for both days. We represented ICTV, Independent Community Television Victoria, and I'll be putting up the videos that we did on YouTube. But I saw Mark Emery and Jody Emery speak. I think they were sponsors, at least partial sponsors of the event. But there were a couple of things that really impressed me about it, and I want to talk about this more on the show. I want to, in fact, for the next several weeks or months, I want to do a segment on permaculture, because I think that hemp, what we're seeing in hemp, folds into permaculture, which is a whole way of looking at agriculture, which is different from the way we look at it traditionally.
Yeah. Now, this, like, we have two kind of different things happening. Like, when we start talking about hemp, I'm thinking about rope and fabrics and
Yes.
Building materials and all that stuff. And then we talk about hemp as in marijuana, as in
Yes.
consuming marijuana, and that gets broken down into two categories in my mind. One would be medicinal, although most people would all claim that everything's medicinal. And then there's recreational use of cannabis. So say in this forum this weekend, were they covering all these three bases?
Sure, they were talking about it, but of course the main topic is about the interdiction of its usage for it used to be just a weed, and what it looks like to me, as I realize that I'm an immigrant. I wasn't born here. I was born in the United States, and I've spent my life outside North America to a large extent. But to me, it looks like the governments of the North American governments, in particular, the United States and Canada, made a big batch of Kool-Aid in the 1920s and 30s and kept on drinking it until today. Well, and so they're still making this differentiation in our minds that they're two different.
Manufacturing and use of hemp as an industrial product.
Right, and hemp has been around for centuries. And in fact, I brought this book. This is called The Reign of Law, and I'll put it up. But it's a book, a novel that was written over 100 years ago, and it's about the backdrop is the usage of hemp in the United States, and at this particular time, hemp was a driving economic force because it was used for so many different things, and so
where were they using hemp? Like
they'd use it for ropes. They used it for clothing. It was a basic. Everybody grew hemp. And you could eat it. You can eat the seeds. They're a great source of protein. So I'm finding out about this. But the main thing this book is not about hemp, except as a driver. Yeah. This was driving the expansion of North America into taking over the land and subduing it. So the thing is that hemp shows up when it's a necessity, and hemp is showing up now. And we're not aware of it because it's not being publicized, and the people in the government are not talking about it because it's not to their interest to talk about it, because their focus is on sunset technology. They're focusing on petroleum and the things that hemp could take over. Forest products, we're still chopping down old growth forests for paper, and hemp can replace all that. So what I want to do is I want to talk about permaculture, but I want to talk about hemp as a part of that. Yeah. And I want to engage people who are involved in that. And just as an example, the thing in my mind has been turned so much by being on this show. Yeah. I've seen a lot of people, and the people who impress me are the people who look at something and say, gee, this isn't right, I'm going to go do something about it. And they don't say, gee, the government should do something about it, but they just actually get up and do something about it themselves. I met another fellow in Costa Rica when I was on my vacation. He was speaking French at an organic market, so I engaged him in conversation, and I subsequently interviewed him for almost 2 hours. And his goal is very simple. When Fukushima happened, he thought, gee, I'm in France, we've got a bunch of nuclear reactors. This could happen here. So I'm going to move to some place where they don't have a lot of nuclear reactors, and I'm going to work on permaculture, because those are the real issues
But
of today.
permaculture, like how do you break that word down?
Well, permaculture is farming that just works. His model for permaculture is the jungle. The jungle just works. You walk in the jungle, nobody takes care of the jungle. It just works.
It's in
so
balance.
That's the kind of thing that permaculture is. It's not plowing up a field and putting a bunch of chemicals on it to make things grow. It's just establishing a growth. And there's a beautiful permaculture installation in Vietnam. It's been in the same family providing food for 400 years. So you see, this is the kind of thing, some people look at the world, at all these things that are happening, and as Werner was pointing out in this show, he's an intelligent guy. He has a formation in mechanical engineering. And so he's looking at the problem and saying, we can't just talk about this anymore. We have to do something.
Yeah.
So my idea is, let's talk about permaculture, because everybody in Victoria can do a little something. Everybody in Victoria can make a little garden.
Yeah.
And if we all do things like that, we lower our we increase our food security, as Dave Friend of Mr. Organic was saying. We need to increase our food security on the island for all sorts of different reasons.
Okay, but how does that relate to this topic about the use of hemp? Are you saying that we should be planting hemp in our gardens?
I think that what we can do is, instead of talking about what we ought to do, we can just sort of look at what's happening.
Yeah.
And instead of allowing corporate interests, moneyed interests to say, this is what you should be looking at, this is what you ought to be looking at, because this is what we have planned for you. Instead, each one of us can look at the situation and say, what can I do in my own garden?
Right.
What can I do in my own house? Now, hemp, what I'm saying for hemp is, the last person I interviewed, Deborah, was talking about how in Saskatchewan, before it was made illegal, everybody grew hemp because it was so useful. In fact, I was reading in some states, before they became states in the United States, it was illegal if you had a farm not to grow hemp. You had to grow hemp because it was so useful.
But how would they process hemp? I mean,
there's all sorts of machinery, and there's much more machinery for it now. I mean, the only reason that we don't use it is because it's illegal.
Right. So that's the main
So
stumbling block here. I think it's a federal law that we have to get.
I'll be interested in engaging with politicians when hemp is as legal as dandelions. Then I'll know that they have stopped drinking the Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to put up a video by Mark Emery.
Yeah.
He's a very intelligent person, and he was allowed to be extracted from Canada, even though he had broken no Canadian laws. The Canadian government just said, come and get him. And then he spent a couple of years down in the United States, and his wife would go down faithfully.
He was in prison.
He was in prison in the United States for breaking a United States law. And he was just, so I don't know, I look at this and
So what do you think? Do you think that the federal government, the Trudeau government, is going to do something here and step up and try to create some legislation?
But what I want to do is, I want to see what we can do as individuals, and I want to look at where there is some, at least nascent intelligence springing up somewhere on the planet, because some country is going to say, gee, this is the most useful plant on the planet. Let's make it legal and allow our people to harvest it. Uruguay has already made some moves toward. Spain is kind of an interesting place because it's technically legal, and there's no government. The government doesn't even function right now.
You know, there's some remarkable testimonies online of people who have used hemp oil to cure cancer.
Oh yeah, there are loads of anecdotal stories, but the problem is that it's still illegal in most places.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is, what we all need to do is just back off and look at this situation, because if you're in a place where the politicians have lied about it for so long, you can't believe them. You can't even listen to them because they're not thinking straight. If they're lying to us about a plant that has been part of the basic human, it's just part of our environment.
But you remember back in the 30s, they made the movie Reefer Madness.
I know, but
and all
that's part of the Kool-Aid. That's what the government financed this stuff. The U.S. government was the one who said this is bad stuff.
Yeah.
But now we're seeing that it's necessary stuff, that we absolutely need this plant.
It's funny times we're living in because, of course, south of the border in Washington State, and I think in Oregon, they've legalized
exactly
marijuana, and also in Colorado. I don't think there's people running around in the streets robbing banks and breaking the laws. I don't think there's any reports of any real change. Has there been?
Well, there's some change, and we can talk about that. But the main thing is that the political discussion is sort of irrelevant now at this point. I mean, it's just we're going to see who wakes up.
So basically, what you're saying is that we as citizens should start figuring this out on our own and start figuring out how we can implement and integrating hemp into our lives and make,
yes. And there's an amazing amount of intellectual property here, right here in Victoria, and I want to talk about it. So that's what I'm going to do.
Well, that's going to be a lot of fun, Will, and we're looking forward for that in the upcoming segments of Citizens Forum. So that wraps up the show for this week. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next week.